guys are back already. My bad. Just trying to get some practice in while I was on home quarantine. Anyway, we're going to start lesson 3 today, and that is going to be over. You know them. You love them. You probably used them as fishing bait when you were a kid, the oligochaetes. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, let's continue on with our annelids. Today we're going to talk about the class Oligochaeta. This is the class we are probably most familiar with. These are earthworms. Some of you may know them as night crawlers. There are about 3,000 species of class Oligochaeta, commonly referred to as redworms. They are the aquatic oligochaetes. They are bottom-dwelling burrowers. They are very common to be used as fish food, especially in your saltwater aquariums. They can get up to about 10 centimeters long. And there you go. The night crawler, there are lots of different species of night crawlers. They are found in soil ranging in length from up to 3 meters long. 3 meters is a little over 9 feet. So imagine an earthworm that's pushing 10 feet long. I believe this species is found in Australia. And there's an example of one right there. I know I have never seen an earthworm that I would hold with 2 hands like that. So that is one seriously long earthworm. This is probably the one we're most familiar with, the common earthworm or the night crawler. Scientific name, its species name is Lumbricus terrestris. Can get up to about 30 centimeters long when mature, and usually burrows up to the upper 30 centimeters of moist soil. So they really don't get very deep. And you typically find them in very dark colored soil where it's very rich in organic matter, because this is where they're going to get their nutrients. Most people have no idea how many worms are under their feet. It has been estimated that there are anywhere, give or take, about 54,000 earthworms that will be found in 1 acre of soil. So an acre is roughly the same size of a football field. And you think about 50,000 worms being found in that soil. That's pretty densely populated. Now, some of you may be thinking, wow, that's kind of gross. I don't like to think about it. That's a whole lot of earthworms. But earthworms are very beneficial to the environment and to the soil. They do a really good job of aerating the soil, which is their air atmosphere can get into the soil, and that's good for plants. They're just a good, very useful and beneficial member of the ecosystem. So keep that in mind if you're a little freaked out by possibly having thousands of earthworms under your feet. The Lumbricus, these are the genus of those earthworms, repay the soil. They constantly overturn the soil and bury plant matter, adding nutrients to the ground. A lot of times they'll eat some of the dead and decaying plant matter. They'll come up at night and they'll take old leaves that are wet and are decomposing, and they'll drag them down underneath and eat some of them. And whatever part of the leaf doesn't decompose in the soil or isn't eaten by the earthworm will decompose in the soil, and that returns nutrients to the soil for living plants to use and grow, and again, be very good and useful to our environment. They burrow with 2 methods. The first method is they eat their way through. So they'll simply just reach up and grab the dirt with their mouth and ingest it because they also eat dirt. So this is typically done in very hard or dense soil that they can't just force their way through, push their bodies through. So the peristaltic contractions, this is the wave of muscle contractions we talked about with the polychaetes. This is done in soft soil. So what they'll do is, we talked about on lesson 1, they're different muscles. They're circular and longitudinal muscles. So they will constrict the circular muscles, which will make their bodies skinny. And as they get skinny, long and skinny, they force that part of their body up into the open space of the soil. And then they relax the circular muscles and they contract the longitudinal muscles, which make their bodies now become short and fat. So they kind of wedge themselves in, and their setae, their tiny hairs that you can feel on the bottom edge of their ventral surface, the setae then will dig into the dirt, and then they will pull the rest of their body along. And they just they'll get skinny and push, and then get fat and pull. And that's how they will if you think of an accordion, they'll just kind of accordion their way through the soil. The integument protects the organism from soil abrasion. This is their skin is kind of tough. I mean, they are flexible, and you can push a hook through them pretty easily, but for what they're trying to do, their skin will, as they push their way through the dirt, it does protect them. They have no eyes, but the integument contains photoreceptors, which are photo for light receptors in each segment. So they know when they're in the dark, and they know when they're out in the light. And of course, being terrestrial, being subterranean, they definitely want to be in the dark. Respiration also occurs across the integument, which means they get their oxygen through their membrane, their skin, and this is why they have to remain moist. They have to remain wet. That aids in the diffusion. If they don't, they dry out, then they not only do they lose their body fluid, they'll also suffocate. Digestion is very simple. Digestive tract, we talked about in lesson 1. Their body plan is a tube within a tube. And basically, once you get past the first 15, 20 segments, then all of their body segments are identical all the way down the full length of their body. That just repeats over and over and over again. Food goes in the mouth, goes through the pharynx, through the esophagus, into the crop and the gizzard. And then from the gizzard kind of helps grind it up. And from the gizzard, it goes into the intestine. And again, this is all done in the first few sections of their body. And once it passes to the intestine, it is intestine all the way down to the back end of their body. So here is what we're talking about. So here's their body plan. So here's the mouth and pharynx up front. And as they take a bite of dirt, it goes in the mouth through the pharynx, will go into the esophagus, which is the beginning section. And then it goes into the crop, which kind of sections it into smaller pieces of dirt. And then it passes into the gizzard. And then once it's in the gizzard, it gets ground up into a finer material, a finer grain. And then that material is sent down the intestines. And so that means, digestively speaking, from here all the way down through the rest of its body, it is just intestine inside its body. The intestine does not fold or wrinkle or go back on itself the way ours does. That intestine just goes in a straight tube all the way down their body until it gets down to the end. And you can see there's intestine right there. And when it gets down to the end, whatever's left over gets squeezed out as excrement. Inside, again, here's another look. So these are the reproductive structures here. These are the testes. And here is the dorsal blood vessel. These are those aortic arches or hearts. So here is the brain, very small brain, mouth, pharynx is in there. The esophagus is underneath all of this. And then we go crop, gizzard, and then intestine all the way down. And that is that is the extent of their internal anatomy. So basically you can go from here down. Every segment of their body is structurally identical. The intestine secretes enzyme called cellulase. So anytime you see in biology, anytime you see a word that ends in ace, it means it's an enzyme, which is something that breaks something else down. A lot of the enzymes that we produce are acid, the stomach acid, the enzymes that divide things that dissolve things in your stomach. The primary digestive enzyme is hydrochloric acid, and it just breaks down the material. Now, being able to produce cellulase, which is something that breaks down cellulose, that means they can break down the cell walls of plant cells, and that is very beneficial. We cannot break down cellulose. That is why our dietary roughage is usually plants, because we can't break it down. Most mammals can't break down cellulose. There are some animals that have found loopholes to try to get around it a little bit. Cows will chew their cud to help get in as much out of the plant as they can. But by producing the enzyme that breaks down cellulose, they are much better at getting nutrients out of plants than we are. Reproduction. Oligochaetes are hermaphroditic, which means there are no males or females. They just are earthworms. Every earthworm has male and female reproductive structures. So we as humans think that that's odd, but if you think about it in nature, this for an animal that can't hear and has no eyes, this makes it much easier for an earthworm to find a mate. So because it doesn't have to find a member of the opposite sex, it just has to find another earthworm, period. There is no male, there is no female. So that means every earthworm is a mate or is a possible mate for every other earthworm on the planet. And since earthworms are such a key player in our ecosystem, this is a good thing. This is something that is not only beneficial for them, but it is beneficial for our environment as well. Lots of things eat earthworms, and earthworms are really good at breaking down substances and putting nutrients back into the soil and aerating the soil. So the fact that it's easy for them to find a mate is a good thing. So what happens when they find each other, usually on a rainy evening where they have to come to the surface, and then they find each other and mate, and they line up in opposite directions so that the male reproductive openings line up with the of earthworm A will line up with the female openings on earthworm B, and vice versa. And that is how earthworms will mate. They mate by holding each other with the setae, which are those tiny little hairs on the side of their body, at the clitellum, and the clitellum is the swollen part of their body. You've seen it 1,000 times. You just don't know it. As soon as I get to the picture and point it out, you'll realize that you have seen it. And then those setae will pierce the integument. So they kind of actually will hold on to each other by piercing the skin with their tiny little hairs on their bodies. This means every other earthworm is a possible mate for every other earthworm on the planet. So that, again, is a good thing, makes it easier for them to find a mate. They must meet on the surface. They don't have room in the tunnels to do this. So it must be warm, damp, and usually at night, so they are safer from predators. And this is how earthworms mate. So again, you can see their bodies are pointing in opposite directions. And this is the clitellum, that swollen section right there. And they're actually stuck together. The CT pierced the skin, and this allows them, the male parts, to line up with the female parts, and male parts line up with the female parts. And this is how they mate. So this means this earthworm is going to crawl off and go lay eggs, and this earthworm is going to crawl off and go lay eggs. So they will both fertilize each other's female, the eggs or ovum that they carry. All right, and I think they're on a slide with two earthworms locked in a reproductive embrace is a good place to stop. All right, that wraps up the earthworms. I hope you're not scarred by that last image. So we know the drill. If I'm not back yet, that means, you know what? Let's just go ahead and go take the exit slip anyway, if I'm back or not. All right, have fun with that. We'll talk to you later.